a plan if I'll do A, B, C, right? It basically no one got in my way on this first few turns. And then after that, I was like, oh, what the fuck do I do now? I'm
Yeah.
like, I got everything. What the hell do I do? It helped that A, people gave me money on that one Carthag. They helped a lot. And then I'm like, well, I guess I'll just get spice. Why not, right? And just play the hand I'm dealt. And then it was sort of like, oh, there's the worm card. I'll buy. I didn't know about that, but I guess I'm gonna buy one now. That's a way to go. And then it's like, oh, those have 2 victory points in the battle. I guess I'll try to do that.
All right, well, here
And I also planned to get 1 point with each of the factions on the side because those are 4 free victory points, right? So you got to do that, and then get maybe some more also by going over the line.
yeah.
And that was enough. So
All right. Got everything set up, so let's get it started. It's Monday, January 4th, 2021. I'm Rim.
I'm Scott.
And this is Geek Nights. Tonight we are talking about outages. Apropos of nothing. You said you have an opening bit, so you can just start.
Yeah, why not? Finally back from a very long breaky.
Oh, I gotta work. I was working today.
It feels like I'm back from a long break because today was my first day of work. But actually, we did Geek Nights up through. We only skipped one Geek Nights, a Thursday, right? So
yeah.
It's actually not that long a break for the listener.
Yeah, and we only skipped that one because it was the actual New Year, like New Year's Eve.
Yeah, okay. So we talk a whole bunch about what we were going to do during the break. What the fuck did we actually do? We played some video games.
Yep.
Podcasted.
Yep, I played a lot of video games.
So the one thing I actually did sort of work on a little, get the ball rolling on is for some reason, I think partially because of the advent of code thing, was I sort of remembered why I like programming computers a little bit. Because when I'm at work, the computer programming is Python, Postgres, right? There's a web page, it sends in some stuff, you make some queries, it's SQL, you send out some JSON or whatever, right? It's a lot of the same stuff, and it's very high-level programming. There's no algorithms you got to worry about usually, right? It's already implemented by someone else. You just take the magic words and put them in the right order.
Yep.
That sort of thing. And that's not that interesting, right? That's not, what makes you don't become a fan of computer programming doing that kind of stuff that business.
I'm sure there's someone out there. Like I've met people who are weirdly passionate about that type of weird enterprisey technology stuff, but there aren't many.
Yeah. Anyway, so I talked about before how I was I took my old computers off the shelf, right? My Mac Plus and my Apple II GS. I upgraded them a little bit more. I made them easier to use, so I don't have to use old school floppy drives, even though I have them and they work. And they're working perfectly. I upgraded them both. It's amazing. And basically, I was like, well, what can I actually do with these things, right? Besides, the only things you can really do with them are use the software that was created for them. And some of those softwares you might want to use, man, I could use Microsoft Works for a Mac, and that's from 1990, whatever. And It's actually kind of fun. But it's it's kind of nice compared to the word processors we have today, even Google Drive.
It's so weird to think back. There was a time when I had a 486 that wasn't connected to any network, couldn't even dial up yet. And I would just sit there doing something on that computer for hours on end.
Right, and there are games for it, but the games for these things, it's like Carmen Sandiego, probably the best game on the Mac Plus, I guess, that you can play, right? Even with the 4 megabyte of RAM upgrade. The screen is black and white, right? SimCity, I guess it plays, SimCity, And it's even with the upgrades and everything, it's they're not that convenient and nice to use. So with the upsides of the good feelings that you can get from some retro software, the difficulty of using them, it's even if I did use them, it's getting the data that I wrote something, getting that writing off of that computer is a little bit of a hassle, not a huge one, but hassle enough, right?
Yep. There is hassle.
What you actually do with them is program them, right? That's what you can do. You can make them do something cool, right? And that's the exciting activity you can do with these old computers. And of course, though, in doing so, it's oh, right, that's also kind of a hassle. Not just, learning the language, learning the architecture is fun and great. Get an old Apple II GS assembly manual, read it. It's figure out its quirks. That's not a problem. But it's all right, now go get that program into that computer and make it run it. debug it without, it's like, I complain about IDEs, but it's like, this isn't even like, Vim shell situation, right? This is way worse, right? This is like, you can only see a few lines of text at a time, with a basic listing situation. It's not great once you've had modern conveniences. But I sort of wanted, I still got the feeling to like, hey, I want to make, so, if you think about making like modern software, like, is not so exciting, right? I want to make the old software, but I want to have the convenience while making the old style software of my current, just at least shell and terminal and text editor, right? Like it's 2020, right? Whatever. And I went looking around and I was like, there's those, I don't know how many people, there weren't too many like well-used programs outside of business that use these things. Because I think most people at home who had DOS were like playing games, right? Or using Windows 3.1 or whatever.
Yeah, pretty much. There were very few non-game applications that would launch in DOS like on its own.
Right, but it's like in DOS, there were applications that sort of had a Windows-like GUI that was made with the ASCII character.
Oh, yeah. I had a lot of things that would like configure stuff that would do that. I also
like,
had,
for example, when you installed Wolfenstein 3D and it told you to choose what sound card you had, right?
Yep.
That sort of interface, right? Or if you wanted to edit a text file, you edited your autoexec.bat using edit.exe in DOS, right?
Yep.
That thing. And I was like, there are a lot of programs that had that sort of DOS text UI.
like an ASCII character set UI.
Exactly. And I know that nowadays, if you want to make that kind of UI, you would use like N curses or, something along those lines, right? But those N curses UIs, they don't look and feel the same as the old DOS ones. They're not all blocky. They're technically blocky, but they don't have that same feel. So I was like, what did they use to make those, right? That was before my time. I never made one of those. They must have used some library to make those.
Did I? The closest I ever got is I would make like command where it would ask you to like type an answer to something to like do something, but they were still just like, yeah, blah, 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 yes, no. And I'd type Y and then my script would continue.
So there were two things that people used that I found to make those in the DOS days, for DOS specifically, those text-based GUIs that still had like file menus and status bars and desktops and windows and dialog boxes and all that shit, right? One of them was something I never knew existed, which was Visual Basic for DOS. Visual Basic for DOS came out after Windows Visual Basic came out. And it's pretty amazing. And the only thing I could find with it that was a problem, I got it to run in a Windows 3.1 DOS VirtualBox, no problem. It totally works great. The problem with it is that the applications it produces are not great to run on like a current computer, right? So that was sort of like, that was like a really hopeful discovery.
Yeah.
That was sort of also a dead end, right? You can't like put those on like your Linux box and run them. So the other thing I found was, and this is the answer, this is my opening bit.
All right.
Was the thing that I knew the name was familiar, but I never, if you said, ask me, what is the thing I'm about to say? And then I could say, well, that's a thing I've heard of, but I don't know what the fuck it is. It must be some programming thing. It was a thing called Borland. Remember Borland? They used to do this.
I remember Borland.
Borland TurboVision, right?
I don't think I've ever heard of that.
I've heard of a thing called Borland TurboVision, but I didn't actually know what the hell it was, right? Borland TurboVision is a library Borland made for making those text-based UIs. If you Google image search Borland TurboVision, I guarantee you will know, at least someone your age, will know programs that look just like that. And if they look just like that, they were made with Borland TurboVision.
Oh, wow. The Pascal version was distributed alongside Borland Pascal.
That's correct.
On a bonus disc. It was never released under a free license.
Indeed. However, somebody on GitHub has a repository, Tvision, which is basically a implementation of Borland TurboVision, C++ library, but you can compile and run it on like Windows, Mac, or Linux and get your programs to build no matter what, because it just relies on, it'll basically link to N-curses or whatever the local text-based GUI library is, but then for you code as if you're coding Borland TurboVision C++, in 1990, whatever. And this is very well, Borland TurboVision is very well documented. The books are now just PDFs online. They were probably really expensive books back in the day, or they came with the expensive software.
Yeah.
And I found all the example code online. I found like everything. So I haven't done C++ in a long time, but I found some good free C++ books that were probably really expensive back in the day to help, remember what I haven't done C++ in like 15 plus years. Got to remember some syntax here and there and see what's changed since then. I think they're on like C++ version 17 now. But I'm not aware of for anyone else for who's like, I don't want to speak too soon and shit talk, right? I feel like, there's a lot of programs. I've actually made some programs, but like they don't have UIs, right? It's just like the processing part. And it's like, if I really master this TurboVision thing, that could be like, my thing.
That could be your shtick, like the wet bandits or the sticky bandits.
I can make games
or kill a fit
stuff. Imagine like, you play like a Hypnospace Outlaw, right? I could make a game, but it just looks like Borland TurboVision. Hypnospace Outlaw. And it's a lot of fun. I mean, it's way more fun than my job. And if I'm stuck inside, check it out.
So in some, obviously the news that gave us the idea to do the show, everyone came back to work after the holiday and Slack wasn't fucking working this morning.
Yeah, at first I thought it was just an artifact of the fact that because I haven't used my work computer in a while, I was logged out of the single sign-on.
I think a lot of people took a while to realize that it was actually down for similar reasons.
So I tried to log into the single sign-on again and get Slack to open again, and then Slack actually like the Slack Windows app is just like one of those Electron web things. So it switched to I clicked on a link in it to go to the Slack status page. But then the whole app was stuck on that page. There was no way for me to like reload or escape from that. So I had to uninstall the whole Slack app because I couldn't clear its cache because its menu wasn't appearing in the app, right? And then I figured out, all of Slack is down. It was down for several hours. It was completely 100% down. And this totally reminds me of that time where Blizzard launched a Diablo game.
Oh, yeah.
Diablo 3. And then they went down. And it's like, you gotta, I said this, we were talking about it earlier. It's like I worked at a website called Broadway.com. We knew during the Tony Awards, we're breaking Broadway.com. That's our time.
Yeah.
That's the time for us, right? We're in this, we know what business you're in. You know what your time is, right? If you're, working at NFL.com, the Super Bowl is your fucking time, right? That's your time that you don't go down. You don't mess with shit. Right? You add extra servers, you increase your whatever you got to do, right? You know when your time is. Stop uploading code. This is January 4th. Slack, the first day people come back to work after a break, right? And Slack knows who they are. They've been around for years. They're not brand new. They know that they should know this is your day. Nobody is using their vacation day today.
Nope.
Everyone has a lot of messages from the past month they haven't read stacked up so that when they log in, they're going to need to load a whole bunch, and they fucked it up. And whoever is responsible deserves, they deserve negative consequences.
Yeah, we'll see. But we're not going to get into like outages because that's the main bit that we'll talk about in detail.
No,
but
this outage.
Yep. But this outage, things like this happen not that often, actually, in the modern world. Like they're
happening less. Like back in the early days of Twitter, they'd be like the whale, right? And I think the only site that's had a lot of outages more recently is Reddit. Reddit has problems.
I guess I've noticed that.
And there was like a brief YouTube outage somewhat recently.
It was a weird outage because of the way it manifested. It seemed like YouTube was working, but then videos would like play a little bit and then peter out. It took me a while to figure out.
Like these are getting increasingly rare, and this one was long and complete, like mega.
Yep, but I guess one takeaway you can think about is think about how many companies you wouldn't otherwise think about use Slack for something critical, and how many people literally just cannot do their jobs without it.
Mike, it took a while for my coworker to figure out we could use Google Chat.
Yeah.
I think other people did the same thing as well.
We actually have like fallback plans of like, if X is down, here's like the 2 other tools in order that people will like devolve to. And that works okay, but
if we really needed to, we could have emailed, right?
Nah, just pay Google. It's cheap.
Yeah. But yeah, I was actually surprised, but also I was disappointed and surprised in this outage because the Slack status page. Companies, I complain about this all the time. They have status pages that are
Yep.
always up. I've never seen a status page go down, so they're doing a good job with that. But the status pages always seem to A, update late, right, relative to when the outage happens, and B, under report, right? They'll have like a yellow triangle when it's clearly red X, right? You know, Amazon is the worst at this. Like S3 will be down, and you'll go to the Amazon 3 status page, and it'll be like S3 yellow triangle in like one region, and it's like, no, I don't even work there, and I know that you are red X.
Yeah.
I've already figured this out, right? You're lying, and
Well,
10 minutes later, they still haven't updated it.
there's a bunch of reasons for that, and some of them have to do with like contract stuff where depending on what you say, like there can be clawbacks and contracts and SLAs.
Well, if you fuck up, then get clawbacked.
But at the same time, what if your site is oversensitive and it says there was an outage that there wasn't? Someone could still claw back saying you officially notified us that there was an outage.
There must have been some sort of problem if it did that. Even if it's overly sensitive.
I think false positives in enterprise monitoring are more common than false negatives.
Maybe.
That's a gut feeling I have. I don't have data to back that up. That's a gut feeling. Also, my perspective is heavily skewed by being in capital markets, which is its own world.
Even so, so Slack, during this outage, they were slow. I knew that they were out completely everywhere with everything. And their status page was showing the yellow triangle or actually showed nothing for a while. Then it showed the yellow triangle. But they did eventually go to, I guess they don't have red X, they have red circle with white line in the middle.
Yep.
And they eventually did go to that across the board for all of their little, app.
Well, Slack also, they went public recently. I don't think that affected their stock.
Yeah, but I'm really, really curious what they messed up to be down not only on the critical day, but for such a large amount of time. With the amount of in engineering resources they must have.
It's like no one put out a patch or pushed out some code to production like New Year's Eve.
And if you look at their status page, there might be new information I haven't read before the show, but if you looked at their status page where they updated every half hour as to what they knew, like the first 4 updates, they didn't know a damn thing. So that was 2 hours. They just didn't know what the hell was.
Verge only has 2 updates on the story. The first one saying they updated to say that it's a full outage, and then another one saying the service may be returning to some users, and then nothing.
You know how I'm gonna there's two ways I tell if something is down. Well, 3 ways. There's a website isup.me.
Yep.
Right.
Which is a good website, but at the same time, I have seen people who don't really know technology go to that website and make really, really like ridiculous assumptions from what they see there.
There's Down Detector, which is where people self-report, like a thing is down for me, and if enough people self-report, then you can sort of infer that like it must be down for a lot of people if there's this many people, and it's pretty accurate actually. And then there's Twitter, where I just search Slack down or YouTube down.
Twitter is my go-to for that, unless Twitter's down.
I sort by latest, and if I see that there's a lot of recent tweets saying that a thing is down, it's probably down. So with that in mind, if I'm a company, right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up some sort of thing that monitors Twitter and searches for the name of my app down. Like and if it suddenly sees over a certain threshold of tweets saying, is my thing down?
In the very least, it like opens a ticket for someone to go take a look.
Right. Like if I run Gmail, I'm at Google, and if I see a lot of tweets that say, is Gmail down? And that I'll see what the baseline is when I know we're up, right? And then I'll set a threshold. And if the number of tweets saying, is Gmail down goes over the threshold, that's how we know.
So you want to know something funny? Because we don't Scott and I don't talk about our jobs that much. We talk about the tech we use, but not like our actual jobs. Most of my career has been around that kind of monitoring and alerting of outages in large enterprise environments. Like, that's what I was doing from IBM onward, is that kind of thing. And in my professional opinion, most companies on Earth have garbage for detecting problems, let alone correcting them. Nobody has good monitoring. No one. I've only seen in my life one company that I thought had adequate monitoring. And you know why they had adequate monitoring? They spent way more money than they should have. If they'd spent less money on that monitoring, they probably would have been fine.
Yep. We have basically more than, we have basically okay monitoring, right? It's like we basically set up at work. We have some software as a service monitoring thing. We install it, we set it up, it posts.
What are you using, like New Relic or something? I forget what all the
I
offerings
think
are
it's a
these
different
days.
one, but basically it posts on Slack in a channel when things go over, right? Whatever they're supposed to be, and then people actually do. It's calibrated pretty well so that like you don't usually ignore when it posts in there, right?
Because that's the cardinal sin of that kind of monitoring. If it's noisy, no one will ever pay attention to it, and then when something's really down.
Pretty much anytime something gets posted from the bots, the monitoring bot in the Slack channel, I see like other people being like, "Hey, so and so, what's up with this?" Right?
Yep.
Take action on it.
I mean, my like guiding force is like the statements of how to do good monitoring are very simple. Alerts must be actionable. They must be stateful, meaning if the problem resolves itself, they clear. They must be accurate. They must have a high signal to noise ratio. And if you can't meet all of those 4 things, that is not something you should be alerting on because you don't understand the problem sufficiently.
Yep. And then we have whenever I set up anything on Oz, I set up CloudWatch.
Yep.
Right? And I sort of set up 2 levels of CloudWatch. There's the level that's for, the monitoring and the Slack posting and the actionable items. And then there's like a debug level that doesn't obviously alert anyone about anything, but that way I can go and check it because I have to make the software work and I have to see that.
Yep. The real key to all that these days is like, in the old days, people would set up that monitoring software, but they'd pick like specific indicators and make rules about it. The modern way to do it that very few people are doing, like it's an area where machine learning could and should be applied, but weirdly isn't in most cases, is just to detect anomalies and not worry about what those anomalies are and use that to determine if things are down.
So just basically, here's every single metric.
Yep.
Okay, I guarantee for you, here is a sample of data for all metrics that is stable.
Yep. Here's my last year of operational data, and I flagged where there were problems.
Yeah, and then, all right, so if you see anything out of these that's out of the ordinary for this data, let me know.
Yep, let a human know whose job is to decide if there's a real problem and decide what to do.
If they say no, then don't alert about that amount again.
Well, that's you train the model. That will literally be input into the model.
Right, unless it's statistically significant from whatever they said is okay already, like... There were 2 database connections for the whole year. We added a 3rd thing that connects to the database. It alerts there's a 3rd database connection.
Do you know how much of my career has been telling people to do what I just said in the course of my life? Machine learning's been around for a long time, and this is a pretty easy application of it with like baby's first ML algorithms, like stuff you could have written in Python 5 or 6 years ago.
To see if anyone does that and then see what they're up to.
Yeah. But anyway, moving on to some other news that's actually really, really important. And we should pay attention to this. A whole bunch of Google employees just unionized.
Yeah.
A Silicon Valley union. This is a big goddamn deal. It is a ridiculous myth. And in fact, it's almost like propaganda coming from tech companies telling people, like the line is usually, you don't deserve a union. Look how much better you're paid than like a coal miner. Like that is the typical like propaganda of why you shouldn't unionize. But
anti-union propaganda.
Yeah, unions are pretty much a benefit to society for almost like I cannot stress to you enough. Every reason why you don't just die on the job today is because there was a union at some point if you live in America.
Yep, pretty much.
Like 5-day work week, 40-hour work week. Unions basically busted skulls to get that, kind of literally.
And we can get more, right? It's
like, we should get more.
Those are compromises. We can get more than that if we would just unionize again.
Yep.
But yeah, what it comes down to is no matter where you work, whether you work at a little tiny place with, or you work at a big company, almost every company in the United States is some sort of autocracy, right? They're not usually democracies.
There are very few companies that are just like a co-op.
There's some employee-owned companies, there's some co-ops. There are not many, right? It's usually there's some kind of boss who has literally all the power, or shareholders that have all the power, and employees are basically just, you're not a slave, right? Because you can obviously quit. You're not being treated. Don't even try to compare it to slavery, right? It's not even close.
Yep.
But you're basically, you have a choice. You can continue to work there or not. You're free to go. And if you choose to stay, you want to continue to stay and get money, you got to do what they say, or they could make you leave against your will, right? And then that's your choice, right? So you have no power if your boss says, sweep the floor, and you say, I only want to clean dishes. I don't want to sweep floors. Tough shit.
I was working at that DeBello's in Rochester in college because I was desperate for money, making like $7 an hour. And one day, someone, I think the technical term is, caused a shitstorm in the toilet. And I walked in and saw it, and I walked out and I told the manager, and basically he was like, all right, go clean it up. And I said, I'll quit if you actually make me do that right now.
Yeah.
And he went to someone else, and he basically, no one was willing to do it. So finally he was like, anyone who cleans that bathroom is allowed to leave as soon as they're done and will get paid as though they worked 10 hours today. And one girl was like, I'll do it. But yeah, I would have quit, and I would have had no recourse. If I didn't want to do that, they could have fired me.
Yep, exactly. I mean, they could fire you anyway.
Oh yeah, in most states you can be fired for any non-protected reason at any time. You could be fired because someone doesn't like you, and that's totally legal.
Even if your job is fantastic, like my job is fantastic, right? I mean, relatively speaking, it's not perfect.
I mean, relatively speaking, my job is also fantastic.
I have way less complaints than pretty much everyone I know about my job, right? Everyone else has more complaints about their job and valid ones. I have basically none of those complaints, so I'm just like...
All my complaints are things that capitalism cannot accommodate, like I want to work less.
Yeah, exactly. So the point is that even at my workplace, it's like, well, somebody asked, right, the CEO at like the last meeting, like, how about a 4-day work week? How's that sound? And he was like, nothing's off the table. That's the kind of, they gave that sort of not answer, right? He didn't say yes, didn't say no. But if we had a union, we could instead say 4-day work week or tough shit, right? That's what we could say. So, and we, even at my work where you can say things like, how about a 4-day work week, Mr. CEO, right? We have that level of goodness where I am. We can't say, give it to us or else. But if we got a union, then we could say that.
Yep.
Right?
Now, it's extra
Even though our
tricky.
situation is so good, union just makes it better because you're always getting screwed out of something in capitalism as long as the boss is, just in charge and has all the power.
That said, there are a lot of outward problems with unions that are really just reflections of capitalism and cronyism and such. Like the example we always use is convention centers, where because of union rules, like I can't plug in my own camera without paying them $150, and then I'm not allowed to operate my own camera. A camera person who is paid by the convention center by law has to operate my camera. If I operate my camera, I can get sued.
Yep.
Or kicked out and all sorts of problems.
Right. So that's not a problem with that says like, oh, unions are bad.
That's a problem where the government in that area is making up jobs from nothing to try to avoid the problems of capitalism with the corrupt convention center build in the first place.
Right. And, the union itself, has to operate, there were back in the day, and I think this actually is what also hurt not only the propaganda, but also what hurt a lot of unions was the union's relations with organized crime. Right?
Yeah.
Unions.
Well, also weird stuff. Like a lot of unions in the past 4 years were against Medicare for all for reasons that boiled down to the union got their workers good health care, so why should we push for something different? Then the union didn't get us anything. That's a terrible argument.
That's also, there used to be more solidarity of, unions and all people instead of this sort of competitive, just competitive greed, not caring about other people, right? They were trying to get as much as they could for their people, right?
Yep.
They didn't care about anyone else, right? That same idea hurts all of our society, whether that idea is held by a union or by an individual.
There can also be very dysfunctional unions. Like that can happen because if you've ever done local politics or say volunteered for a convention or been on a board, like people are just so full of ridiculous drama and incompetence that it's kind of amazing sometimes. And the same thing will happen with unions. Like there's no way around that. That's just how people are.
Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that unions are bad. So Google having a union, if they get way more people to sign union cards and such, to get to the point where they can collectively bargain right, with the executives of Google, I think that will have actually, depending on the numbers and what that bargaining deal looks like, that could have a huge impact on the whole world because suddenly, right, no longer will the search engine that powers the Earth, or at least a lot of the Earth. I guess not in Russia. They use Yandex, and in China they got their QQ or whatever.
Well, I mean, Google should be broken up. That's a whole separate conversation.
Obviously, but a very large thing that is so powerful, right, that no one person should be allowed to control it. It should be democratically controlled. Will be more not democratically controlled, but more democratically controlled, in that more people will have a say in its functioning. And that will be for the benefit of all people.
But all that said, honestly, unions are still just a Band-Aid over the root problem, which is American capitalism.
Yeah, pretty much.
Like, unions are just a Band-Aid over these far more fundamental structural problems that are a topic for another show.
Yeah.
So you want to talk about the DPUs?
We can talk about DPUs another time.
All right. Then it's time for... Things of the day. What do you got?
So, on YouTube, we love that lock-picking lawyer, right? Picking all them locks.
Good channel.
Making us interested in watching lock-picking, even though that's not a hobby that I'm personally interested in, right? I'm not even interested enough to go buy one of those practice locks or anything.
I'm moderately interested. I was picking locks. I was picking the lock on my office at IBM a lot because I was bored on when I was doing late night stuff.
Bought one, it would just go next to the harmonica in the closet.
Yeah.
So at least it's small, I guess. Anyway, but it's really interesting to watch. I learned a lot about locks, which is fun and fascinating for a nerd to learn about, but we can't use lockpicking lawyer for thing of the day again. So instead, what I've got is this other channel with a video that has 6.3 million views. So you've probably seen it already, but if you haven't, this person on this Stuff Made Here YouTube channel made a lock that is perhaps unpickable in quotes, right? Because as the lockpicking lawyer says, nothing's unpickable. It just means I can't pick it yet.
Yeah.
But the principle and the fundamental principle is one that even I thought of just watching lockpicking videos, is that when you're picking a lock, right, what you do is you're trying to line up pins or cylinders or discs or levers or whatever it is in a particular configuration.
They're basically a password.
Right. It's basically a password. The key is a thing that moves the whatever they are in the lock, whatever kind of lock you have, into a certain position so that they're just unlocked, right? And if you're picking a lock, what you're doing is manually moving each one into the right position until the lock unlocks. And the way that you figure out when they're in the right position is basically you bind the lock. So you if it was a key lock, you would basically apply turning, some tension, right? Try to turn the lock. And that way you turn the lock, you move the pins up and down. And you can tell if you've got it in the right spot because when they line up, right, the locks are not machined so perfectly, right? You turn it a little bit and it's like the pin will sort of rest on the edge there. You can turn it a little bit, right? And all you need to do is turn it a little bit. And that just creates a space for the pin to sort of sit on the ledge. And eventually you get all the pins to sit on the ledge and you can turn it, right? If you could somehow, and my thinking was just make a lock that's so precisely machined that you can't turn it even 1 micron, right? And that way you could never know if the pin was in the right position unless they were all in the right position.
Or at that point, you make a purely electronic lock that's literal, just modern cryptography and no access to any components.
People do that. Those locks are great. People do that.
Yep. And also, the way most people attack a door is not to pick the lock.
Obviously, yes, that is also true. The physical security is, and lockpicking lawyer doesn't hide that from you, right? So what this person did was even more ingenious in that, when you're picking a lock normally, right, you can figure out 1 pin at a time. So that would be imagine if I had to figure out your password and I could be is the first letter A? How about B? How about C, right? I'd only have to guess 26 different, I guess, plus numbers plus whatever. But I would get the first letter pretty quickly, right? And then I've got that one locked in. So I can just go to the next one. And it actually won't be that many guesses until I get it all right because I can do 1 letter at a time. But that's not how passwords work on a computer. You have to get it's either all or nothing. You have to get everything right or you just get it wrong. You can't, it's not like friggin', Wheel of Fortune here. It doesn't work like that. This lock he made is basically the anti-Wheel of Fortune lock. You basically raise the pins, right? And then you turn the lock, but they pass through a gate that's far away from where you lifted them. So while you're doing the lifting, you can't tell if you've lifted them the right amount. You have to lift all of them to the correct amount before they'll pass through that gate all the way to the side. And there's no way that I can think of, at least, for you to know. So you have to get them all right. You can't be like, got the first one, got the second one, you can't do that with this lock. Very fascinating. You can see the struggles they go through to produce the lock, which is, there's no way, I don't think this can be easily mass produced. At least someone would have to make like a new kind of machine to do it or something.
There's a reason why a lot of the quote unpickable locks are bespoke.
Yeah, this is definitely bespoke, but very fascinating video here. And I recommend watching at least, one video about like, basic normal lock functioning before watching this one.
Go through the gate.
Mean a lot more.
I love watching the locksmith actually try to open this lock because he's basically just like trying to rake it, trying to bump it, like all the basic
He's doing all the
stuff.
things that would work on a normal lock.
Yeah, because most locks, like any lock in any random house, you can probably just bump key with zero problem.
Yeah, that locksmith that they call to come and pick the unpickable lock, is a skilled locksmith.
Yeah.
Maybe not lock being lawyer level, but they know what they're doing. I don't know.
So my thing of the day, I ran into this kind of randomly, and it was a topic I knew a little bit about because my grandpa, his job, like after the World War and all the nonsense, like he was back home and got a job like in the civilian community. He worked as a typesetter at an old-fashioned newspaper, the Macomb Daily. So his job was literally to set the type and like do the press work for an old-style newspaper.
Old school metal bits in the.
Yep. It was obsolete by the time I was old enough to see it in person. And in fact, I remember he and the family, like we went to the Macomb Daily once as they were planning to shut it all down because they wanted to take a bunch of pictures with him because he was like the last living person who did this job.
Yeah, well, I mean, sure, they switched to a digital process, right?
Oh, yeah. In fact, I remember this very like poignant moment when I was a little kid and I came home from school and I showed Grandpa this essay I had written. This was in like 3rd grade, I want to say, maybe 4th grade. I'd written it on a computer and I printed it at school and I brought it home. And I showed it to Grandpa and he said, "That literally just put me out of a job forever. That is amazing."
Mm-hmm.
But basically, in the 19th century, so the 1800s, you might notice if you look at newspapers, there's a lot of ASCII art all of a sudden, even though ASCII didn't exist yet, because typesetting was complicated, and basically people started to be clever, and they do things like submit a classified ad to the paper, but the type they would submit was ASCII art that would make an ad that was way bigger than the single font size they were allowed to use. And it was a whole thing. So this tweet has a bunch of like amazing examples. Like one of them's a picture from what is this? This is like, what year is this? This is the December 6th, 1880 edition of the Brooklyn Daily Eagle. And you go to the classifieds, and there's like this giant ad in the middle of the classifieds that is composed of like 20 different smaller classified ads that all link together in a big ASCII art.
Yeah.
And there's an article I'm also going to link to that sort of gets into how and why this happened. And it seems to come down to there was like one company, Brooklyn Furniture Company, that did it first. And then everyone else was like, what? We could do this? And started being a giant pain in the ass to all the newspapers after that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was made obsolete by this concept, which I'm not going to explain, called hot metal typesetting, but was basically, it was the next form of typesetting. There were multiple competing versions after the like just loose like characters thing.
I don't know anything about it.
Basically, it meant you could have more font sizes and like it was easier to do like more complex layouts, meaning this kind of thing was obsolete. But there was a brief time when people were making ridiculous high quality ASCII art in newspapers to game the system, and it's kind of amazing.
Awesome.
In the meta moment, it's 2021, and guess what? We're still stuck at home.
Well, hopefully we'll only be stuck at home for maybe half of 2021, maybe a little bit more than that.
Yep. Soon, I'm just hoping.
My current estimation is that 2/3 of the way through the year, I've got a better than 50% shot of going outside. Maybe
Yep.
51%. That's my estimation right now, based on.
Because once I'm vaccinated, like I'll still wear a mask in public because I could spread it, and like there's a lot of people.
You gotta get daddy too. One is not enough, right? I'm not. If I get the one, I'm not going out.
No. When I am vaccinated, as in fully vaccinated, I got the full course.
That's right. I got to get number 2, and then I
Yeah.
got to wait a few.
But then I'm only going to get together without masks in private settings with other people who have also gotten the full course.
Yep, and people who I trust not to be morons.
Yep, and that is when ReviewCon will happen.
Yeah. And then I think maybe it would have to be very late 2021, like maybe PAX Unplugged earliest possible, and that's even a shot.
Because the problem is a convention might happen when vaccines are available and a lot of people are vaccinated, but there's a lot of Americans who don't want to get vaccinated, which is a big problem. And as a result, it will mean that we all still have to wear masks to protect these idiots who refuse to get vaccinated. But during that time period, if there's a convention and it requires masks, I wouldn't go because it's not safe to the people who are stupid and refusing to get the vaccine. And also, can you imagine how much of a pain in the ass it would be to wear a mask for like an entire PAX?
Yeah, I mean, it's not, medical people wear masks all day. People work in mines and stuff.
Oh, yeah, but if I'm like at a board gaming con, rather than wear a mask all day, I'll just stay home and play board games with people I don't need to wear masks around.
Yeah, it's not, I think it's, I just don't want to make mask wearing like a big deal. It's
Oh,
not
no. It's
like
requiring masks. We got to get to the point to where masks are no longer required to protect
dangerous
society.
If it's so dangerous that I have to wear a mask, why would I risk going there in the first place?
Exactly.
That's the thing, right?
The first cons we go to will be cons where it is safe to attend without wearing a mask. Until that time, I'm not going to any big events.
Nope. Anyway.
Yeah. So,
if you can stay home, you can read the book club book, which is A Tale of Genji, the first novel ever written by human beings that we have not continued to read at all.
Yep.
Anyway,
I'm reading more and more nonfiction right now.
I'm reading C++ book.
I'm also reading the rest of Chainsaw Man so we can review it on Wednesday.
Yeah. Ooh, spoilers. Wednesday episode of GeekNights, Chainsaw Man the manga.
Yeah. All right, so let's get right into it. There was the outages, the Slack. It gave us an idea. Now, funnily, the listener pointed out right away on the stream, they misread the title of this episode at first as Outrages, and we're excited about it.
I don't know what tech outrages are.
I mean, that could be a good Thursday show. The concept of outrage. Things that outrage us.
A lot of things, anyway.
But no, we're going to talk about outages in a more generic sense.
So, you got your computer systems, and you fuck something up, and now they just, not fucking working.
Yep.
Sucks.
But it's fascinating because, this is a relatively, for normal people who do not work, in factories or in technologist places where, this is a thing, for a long time until relatively recently, technology outages did not impact most people. The impacts were very localized to, a particular business, or the effects of the outages were delayed. There'd be a big problem somewhere, and as a result, my RAM is more expensive for 2 months. But it was, there weren't that many people using social media. There weren't Netflixes and YouTubes and all these things online. And a lot of corporations still used mostly internal or homegrown or analog solutions.
Yep.
So
I wonder, I don't know historically, right? Where the first outages must have been water supply outage, a drought, or a power outage.
I mean, I guess we could consider a drought an outage. Right. The Matawan Reservoir is dry.
Right, but it's still a system, right?
Yep.
Has just completely stopped.
A practically applied technology system used by the average citizen that is now not functioning due to an acute and temporary problem.
Right, and you could think of an outage as my one TV broke, but that's not really. That's just it's not big enough, right? But TV, during broadcast TV days, the broadcast antenna's messed up. TV is out.
I remember there were TV outages. I remember when I was a kid, one of the local networks just went down for 3 days.
The telephone network is not working. You can't make a phone call right now. It's not your fault. There's a system that applies to many people has broken in such a way that it is completely non-functional. Not just a little messed up, but it is just might as well not even exist right now until it's fixed. Something is mad messed up.
Yep. Now, one thing that's really changed in this space in the current era is that previously most systems that a normal non-specialist person interacted with were designed and managed to a degree by engineers, often with regulations and certifications and rules.
Yep.
And most internet things have no, the word engineer barely applies to what is done to make those systems work.
Yeah. And that's not to say that, like, everyone working for, like, your local power utilities on the grid is some sort of, genius,
Yep.
amazing engineer, even though many are, right? But they have all sorts of procedures and protocols and things they've learned, and there's the things that they follow, right?
Well, like I used to work in factory automation. Like I worked in a fab. Like there were like very clear procedures for outages and failures of that machinery.
And since the outages are such a big deal and the system is so old, however old it is, depending on where you are, right? It's like they really got their shit together. Outages are really rare and only happen if there's like somewhat extreme circumstances.
Yeah,
right?
like trains don't crash into each other often in America and haven't for a long time. They're starting to again because our infrastructure is falling apart.
Yeah, they do too often, but once is too often. But yeah,
Yep.
it's not that often.
And then there was, remember the Great Northeast Power Outage?
Yep, that was. But it's like since then, how many outages have there been? I don't think I've had, at least in my apartment, even during hurricanes.
I've never lost power for even a second in the 10 years I've lived here.
Yeah, we've lost power. I think a little bit in Beacon. I think, but I don't think we've
Yep.
ever. I've never lost.
There's a
power.
photo you took of me reading a Penny Arcade comic with the light. Like I was holding up a flashlight and reading a Penny Arcade comic in the dark.
But yeah, in New York City, I've never had a power outage. There have been times where the lights have flickered or like a little mew. Like I guess that counts as a brownout, but like a 1 second brownout, that's not a big deal.
I've had a couple of localized service outages where like my router was dying, but that only affected me.
Stuff like that. There have been some internet outages that were kind of brief, even with shitty Spectrum. I've never had one with FiOS.
But I guess this concept, like to talk about it in a practical way, there's a few lenses to look at. One lens is, are you on the inside or on the outside? Like, if you work for a power company or like Slack and something goes down, that is one like lens of an outage compared to I'm some jerk trying to turn on my light and the light doesn't work because the power's out.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other like lens is, what is the scale? Like the server that runs the spreadsheet stuff that you use to manage your local business only affects your business and maybe like your local customers. But Slack going down affected the entire world for several hours.
Yep. But the point that Rim was making before, Slack doesn't have, I'm sure they do have their procedures and things set up.
But they do not have like formal engineering practices.
They could, but I doubt it, right?
I highly doubt that. I'm talking engineering the same way that electrical and municipal engineers have certifications and practices.
Yeah, they are not set up in that way that the power company is, and that's why they can have a several hour outage.
Yep.
They're also not the kind of thing where, I guess lives are sort of indirectly on the line, but not the same way that they're on the line if the hospital loses power.
And that's why like we're not saying that every internet service needs to have that level of formal engineering and processes and procedures, but that line is a big gray area, and sometimes the consequences of an outage in something that you wouldn't think is consequential can be scarily broad or dangerous.
Yep. You can also see, just from what I know about tech companies, is that, Netflix always talks about they have this thing called the chaos monkey, where it basically randomly, intentionally goes around their production infrastructure, just wreaking havoc, right? All the time. And then what they did is over time, they would design, basically their production infrastructure to basically survive even while the chaos monkey is running. Right? It's like they turn on the chaos monkey, it goes and turns servers off, it blocks network connections, it does all sorts of, it fills up hard drives, it pretends like hard drives crash, it does all sorts of ridiculous stuff, and Netflix doesn't go down, even when they're intentionally trying to make it go down with this chaos monkey. And Netflix doesn't have a lot of outages. So in my professional opinion, they're doing something right over there.
Yeah.
I guess Amazon doesn't have outages either, but YouTube has outages, Slack has outages, Facebook has some outages.
Yep, Twitter's gone down every now and then, and my instinct is always to try to go tweet about it.
Yeah, Twitter used to go way down. Remember the whale? The whale was a big deal back in the day.
Yep.
Twitter people nowadays don't know about the whale. You'd be there. Reddit has a ton of outages. They're awful. It's really unacceptable.
So let's go from the inside first, because this is Monday Geek Nights, and a lot of you are probably technologists or want to be technologists. Like you want to have jobs similar to what me and Scott do. So We'll go from like small scale to like large, like in your house outages all the way up to like enterprise service provider outages, because there's like the types of concerns you have if you work for a company like that are radically different depending on the scale of that company's operation. Like,
I mean, you know, anything small enough to where it can wait till you get back to work is basically no big deal.
yep. And a lot of
We're not even
businesses
talking about it.
operate that way. Like, oh no, the credit card processing system in our local store is down. We have a backup process to charge credit cards.
Only.
Yep.
Cash
Or I don't know if they still require it, but for a long time.
I'll use the Square app on my phone.
Well, I was about to say, I don't know if it's still required. I guess I can Google it during this episode. But for a long time, businesses had to have that the old impression system to take impressions of the credit cards as a backup, because they had to be able to take the credit card even if the system was down.
Yep.
But I think some of that got deregulated and changed over the years. I'm not an expert in that like local space, but if you work for a company like that, it really comes down to, does it impact like your job or the company's bottom line right now, or will it impact it later? And then it's around, do you detect these problems automatically, and do you know what to do to correct these kinds of problems? And honestly, that's the kind of situation where you are probably the only technologist in that entire company. Like small companies will have like one tech person who handles all of that.
Yep.
So it's really in your best interest. Like in those situations, you don't have to worry about all this enterprise nonsense. You don't need like a website hosted somewhere else that'll tell like the people who might come to your submarine sandwich shop that you have an outage or anything. You pretty much just got to come up with like processes to make sure that you are not personally woken up in the middle of the night by anything. And that is it. Like that is your only goal, is to not get woken up at night and never be called when you're not in the office.
When I was responsible for setting up such systems and making sure they're not down, I pretty much set them up perfectly, right? Like handcrafted perfection so that nothing would ever go wrong, and nothing ever went wrong, right? Because I absolutely would not be, have anyone messaging me when I was not at work. And I left at 5 every day. I did it right.
Yep.
Even though we did not use, all these engineering practices or whatever, right? We just basically relied on, my knowledge of how to set it up in a way that didn't suck, and trust in the things that we were using from third parties, that they would be high quality, and several layers of, fallbacks.
Yeah, it pretty much comes down to knowing where are the critical links in the thing you're responsible for, and what are the things that are likely to go wrong with them. And then you've got to have just a broad enough IT and computer science and just computing and technology knowledge to know what kinds of ways you could mitigate or detect that stuff. Like, do you know how to use SNMP to like detect, to like have your Postgres server send out a trap?
You and your SNMP.
SNMP is a pretty solid protocol that
You love that SNMP.
it shockingly just works from a lot of things, especially like operating system level problems.
Yeah, I think most people don't do SNMP directly and are using some other software.
Oh, definitely. SNMP is definitely like old school nonsense at this point.
Yeah, people will just use some monitoring package of some kind.
But like, or if you're not, like a lot of those monitoring packages weirdly aren't really set up to detect specific issues very well, I've found. A lot of them are kind of half-assed. Or they generate a lot of metrics, but not a lot of actionable events, and they're kind of noisy unless you fiddle.
It's on you, right? You have to customize for your thing.
But if you're a coder, when in doubt, log everything, and then figure out what kinds of log lines mean there's something you got to deal with, and write a script that like tails var log messages and emails you whenever like certain lines appear, and come up with a system around that.
That's okay.
Yeah. Then you get more like to middle level, like bigger companies, like Scott's companies, where the Scott's company, like there's a lot going on. There's a lot of systems. There's external.
There's a lot going on. Not really.
But there's like external customers. There's internal users of things. There's more technology infrastructure.
Yeah. But yeah, the biggest problem that you have usually is that, depending on if your company's big enough, right, the resources devoted to different things might not be enough, right?
Yep. A good rule of thumb, if you're not investing about 20 to 25% of like the assets you have into protecting yourself from outages and attacks, you're probably going to have a big outage at some point.
But the thing is that if you don't have outages, right, you're probably not spending a lot of time defending for them, right? You're usually spending more of your time focusing on like making new stuff, right? Or adding, doing other things. So it's like you do a good job and you're not then protecting all the things that come. And then when an outage happens, suddenly your whole company's like, oh, we got to stop what we're doing and go back and work on, defending ourselves and shoring up right? It's like you wait for after the flood before you build a dam. Right?
Which, honestly, often is the right approach if it's not going to destroy the business to have an outage.
Well, but that's the thing. It usually doesn't destroy the business until it does, right? It's like you have a flood, it didn't destroy the business, we fix it, it won't happen again. It happened again because there was something else we were wrong, right? Okay, now it still didn't destroy the business. It happened, something else happened. Okay, and then the fourth time, it destroyed the business. Oops.
But this is where you get into the level to where it's not just one tech person who has to deal with everything. There's often like development people and then separate DevOps or operations people. DevOps is a relatively new concept. Like, that's why it existed, but was not called DevOps for a long time. Big companies just called it operations usually.
Yeah. Well, I think what happens is you've got, your IT people are mostly like set up server, make sure hard drive doesn't get full, set up network, right? All that kind of stuff.
Monitor to see if server I'm responsible for is at max load for too long so I can go yell at somebody.
Right. Software people, they make a software and they make it work on a server and they configure the server, but then you have this sort of in between, like, okay, the software we wrote, you IT person who knows nothing about the software we wrote because you're an IT person. It's your responsibility actually to make the software we wrote run on that server, but actually we could do it better than you could. But we're not, it's your job though. We're not doing it and we're not responsible if it goes down.
That was basically my job for a long time.
Yeah, and it's like, it's sort of tough there. You got to have real good communication, right? It works better if your software, your IT people understand software, and the problem is like for a lot of.
But your software people have to understand IT too.
Oh yeah.
How so many developers like don't fucking know how to install a database? Like.
Oh yeah, a lot. Yeah. But yeah, being a person who knows both like me, usually I'm the one who's sort of, doing that between biz. And it's like, if they just gave me that IT job, like those responsibilities, like I could just do both. Right. And I'd probably do it better than the people who are supposed to be doing it. But I'm not letting anybody call me after 5 o'clock. So I'm not going to do it. And they're not paying me more. So I'm not going to do it. And
I used to do on-call stuff, but they paid me enough to where it was worth it for a while, and it was a rotation. Like every 7 weeks, I had 1 week, or if anything crazy happened overnight, I would get notified. But you know what I dedicated my entire working life to when I was in the office while I worked at that company? Making sure that thing never fucking called me ever.
That's right.
I think I got woken up maybe 10 times ever in that entire time.
That's a lot of times. I don't think I've been woken up 10 times in my life.
Yeah, but a lot of what that came down to was whoever your DevOps or operations people are, like that cannot be underestimated. That's also a career that they don't tell you about in school. Like you think, oh, I'll be a computer programmer.
It didn't really exist so much.
Yeah, it only existed in like big enterprise companies, and like school guidance counselors don't even know that stuff exists. Like IBM had that practice forever. Like that's what I was doing at IBM, like in 2003.
Right.
But
we're talking like, your job as like a DevOps person is going to be stuff like install Nginx and Postgres and configure them and get the software running.
Yep. And understand what that software does and figure out how to monitor this whole ecosystem.
Yeah, and set up a system for it to automatically deploy, to help the developers get their. We've talked about in previous episodes like CI/CD, like actually set that up so because developers aren't setting that up, they're just right. You got to set that up for them to use, right? The things that they tools that they need to get their job done, that aren't just on their computer. Like you have to set them up on the servers. They're not the developer servers; they're your servers.
Yep. But the key to a job like that, like to get a career that could lead more toward like what I do, is you really need to have a very broad and holistic understanding of technology to where it doesn't matter what the software is doing. It doesn't matter what the OS is. It doesn't matter what the hardware is. You can Google all the fiddly details. You need to know stuff like, the load on a server is really high suddenly. What are the kinds of things that could cause that? What would I do to figure out what's causing that? Those soft skills are very hard to teach, and usually people learn them on the job, but get very siloed and very narrowly focused and tend to assume things are problems they've seen before. You really need to like if you don't know what all the different directories in the file system of Linux mean, you will have a very hard time doing DevOps.
But think about it, I've only ever
Docker fails. Where the fuck do you look for logs to figure out why Docker's having a problem? If you don't just know that, you might not know, where does Docker log? But you should know all the types of places Docker is likely to log on any given server, no matter what OS it is.
And you have to create a mental model of what your system's architectures are and know them or learn them, right? Or create them, right? It's it doesn't exist. We need these applications and you need to be able to create a system's architecture, right? Well, I'll set up things this way and install this here and configure them this way. It's I've only ever set up in my life a Postgres, a MySQL. SQLite doesn't count, right? I've never set up an Oracle in my life. I've never used an Oracle. I've never done with.
I've set up Oracle.
I've never set up an Oracle. I've never seen an Oracle. I've never done a single SQL query with an Oracle server. I've done my Microsoft SQL server. I've never installed that.
I was using Postgres and making my own binary replication scheme with DRBD back before Postgres just did all that for you.
But I'm saying I've done connections to Microsoft SQL, but I've never installed it. But I've never touched Oracle. I just know it's this database that exists.
Yep.
But if someone hired me and said, Scott, here is here's Oracle, right? Here's the software. Here's a license key. Here's where to download it, right? It's legal. We paid for it. Set it up. It's going to be used for XYZ. I am 100% confident that I could do that job.
So
100%. I can absolutely do it.
So this is the we talk about we haven't mentioned RIT yet, the school we both went to, the Rochester Institute of Technology. But one thing, and this is relevant because I'm going to get back to an anecdote. The one thing I can say about RIT grads that has been consistent, both when we were there and in my entire career, whenever I meet them professionally, for whatever reason, RIT teaches people these broad skills that a lot of other tech schools just fucking don't, and I don't know why.
Did they really teach me those broad skills?
Well, I don't think RIT taught it. I think it was the co-ops coupled with the kind of vague lesson plans.
The co-op. I think I learned most of that stuff I learned because I would mess around trying to set up my own web server.
Yep.
Right. And I ran Linux as my primary OS during the time period where that made sense to do.
Try making that Counter-Strike server work, like the real one we ran. I learned a lot making that work. I had it monitored.
DNS in our house, right?
Yep.
Doing that, it's the stuff you do at a company is basically the same, only bigger. Right?
Yep. I wonder if it's partly that RIT, there's this culture of that, especially in IT more so than CS. A lot of our classes would have a class that was worthless. If you don't know what Active Directory is, we're going to teach you, and it's going to be terrifying and boring, and most of you are going to skip it. But then the class was graded in a lab where the lab was, by the end of the quarter, we're going to come into this room, and in this room, across these 5 PCs you have access to, you have to run these 10 services providing these 40 different capabilities.
I didn't have that class.
And then hackers are going to attack it, and it's got to stay mostly up. Those are the kinds of classes we had.
That class I had, the hacking class.
That class was super fucking fun. But anyway, I was on defense, and they actually forced us to install old versions of stuff because otherwise no one could hack in.
I was on offense, and there was a message because that lab wasn't connected to the internet.
No.
It was basically, I read a news on Slashdot that talked about a vulnerability in Microsoft Messenger.
Ooh.
Messenger. So I basically downloaded the files for it onto floppy disk, 3.5 inch, and I went to that lab, and sure enough, I could open Microsoft Messenger, right? And I had the patch, the patched version. I was able to try applying the patch to the exe, but the problem was that because the lab didn't have an internet connection, I couldn't log into the MSN Messenger. But it's if I could have, I would have worked because I tested it at home first, and I would have just if I ran it at home, I was able to open up a root CMD.
Yep. But it forced this like fundamental understanding of like how to make basic things work on any kind of computer. So when I got my first co-op at IBM, one of the first things they did is they were like, all right, we have a problem you can help us with. Here is all the installation media for some fucking ancient version of WebSphere. Get it working on this server and deploy this Java application to it.
Are we even talking about outages anymore?
But yeah, but I guess the point is being able to do that kind of thing holistically will make you like a top tier DevOps person who can handle pretty much any outage that gets thrown at you.
All right, went off way topic, but let's one last thing I want to talk about the outages, right? Is when there is an outage, right? You know, how do you deal with it, right? And then how do you not only deal with it in terms of fixing it, but also deal with it in communicating with the people who are.
Oh, yeah, that's a good topic. Question 1, can you fix it before anyone notices? Ask that first.
Oh, yeah.
Because if you can fix it and no one notices, you fucking win. That is like winning. That is winning your job.
If no one notices, there wasn't an outage. If a tree falls in the woods, no one heard it.
Yep.
Right? Okay, so you had an outage and someone noticed, right?
I'd say point 2. If you have an outage and you think people are gonna notice, can you at least tell them before they tell you?
That's also a good thing.
If your user knows there's an outage and you don't, that is a big problem.
Like today.
Yep.
Okay, so next thing, right? So what do? You got to fix it, right? So you got to figure out which area the problem is in, because like we talked about, IT people, software people, DevOps people, one or more of them is going to be the ones to call. If it's full hard drive, your software person is going to be like, I didn't do shit about that, right? And if it's bug in the code, IT person can't fix that no matter how much, resources you give them, right? They need the software person to figure that out. But you might not realize that's what it is.
Yeah.
So you need to sort of get everyone to take a look, right? And see if they're the problem.
Unless you're above a certain scale where that is a waste of everyone's time, you, if you're a DevOps person, should have figured out a triage process to where it's very easy to narrow down what the most likely problems are so you can stop wasting your time looking everywhere else.
Yeah, that's definitely good.
But it's really hard to, that's a hard skill to teach because it really requires that holistic knowledge I was talking about.
Especially since things that first appear to be one thing could be another thing.
Yep.
And the better your systems are set up, when there is a problem, the harder it's going to be to figure out what the hell it is because you rule out so many things that you're defended against.
Yep, and you can tell DevOps people and operations people who never got that sort of formal or at least holistic education in technology but only learned on the job because they will persist in trying to say the problem is something that they've seen before without understanding why it could not be the problem. You'll see that a lot, especially in enterprise.
Yeah, you can usually figuring out what the cause of the problems is very similar to figuring out problems with your local computer, like using process of elimination, understanding how things connect to each other, saying, oh, well, I'm getting an image on the monitor, so the video card is working.
Yep.
Right? But it could be that let me try the monitor on a different computer, right? That same thinking process is the same thing that you use to figure out what's causing the outage.
Like the important server that's having a problem has a link light, like I'm looking at it and there's a link light even though no one can connect to it and it's powered on, so at least some of the circuitry in there is working.
It's got to be on a higher level of the OSI model. It's not on the hardware layer.
Yep. But see what you just said, the OSI model, that is foundational broad knowledge of computing.
Yeah, you have to have a model of the system's architecture in your brain in order, just like you have to have a model of a working PC in your brain to be able to use the process of elimination.
I still remember when I worked at Pipeline, we had 23 daemons, mostly written in C, that did the things, and I still know the path of data through all these different daemons.
Yeah, usually the hardest problems to solve are when your mental model is at a certain abstraction layer and the actual problem is beneath, right? So it's like, okay, I understand how this program works, right? It's written in Python or something, and the actual problem is in a C library that you're importing or some shit. And it's you're not thinking on that level, right? You're thinking of this blob.
Or networking. You're thinking, all right, IP addresses, routers, all that stuff but there could be a problem of a mismatch in your physical network between Ethernet 2 and 802.11.3.
It's like all my IP addresses are right. What's wrong? 2 things got the same MAC address, baby.
Yep.
How'd that happen?
Because someone fucked around, or you got
Very, very, very unlikely for that to happen, but it's possible.
well, unless someone fucked around
Yes.
with cloning or something.
They found out. Okay, so now how you got the outage, right? You know you got people on it, they're fixing it, right? You're gonna do the best you can to fix it. Hopefully you have backups. So worst case, as long outage means you lose time, you might lose money.
Yeah.
But if you lose data, that is the worst, right? So
Yep.
you cannot lose data. You gotta have the backups. Even if you're out for days, if you still have the data, it's like, thank God, right? If YouTube goes down and comes back, okay. If YouTube goes down and comes back and half the videos are gone forever, just shut it all down. That's it. It's done, right?
And I think we did an episode on disaster recovery, which includes such things as starting your business back up in an entirely new physical location because literally everything burned down.
But the data is the thing. If you can, as long as you save the data, everything else can be redone eventually, even if it sucks and you go out of business in the meantime. Do not lose the data. That is always number one. All right, so coming back, right? What do you tell people? You gotta, first of all, you got to be honest with the customer, whoever the client or whoever it is, right?
Yep.
You don't want to be like, oh no, everything's just fine. Problem must be on your end. No, don't do that. That just makes people, because they know you're bullshitting. They can tell you're bullshitting right away. They got
so.
Twitter.
In my experience, once you get way up this jack to like big enterprise companies, usually what happens is both sides will bullshit and say the other side is at fault and ask them to prove it's not them because they're still trying to figure out the cause of the outage. I see that a lot.
That's fine. If you don't know the cause, if it could be someone else, then you don't admit it's you.
But if you know there's an outage, be honest and tell all the people who could be impacted in the most succinct way possible as soon as possible.
And tell them the truth about how they will be impacted, right? So that they can make appropriate plans, right? So like, if you're going to be down for hours, right? You got to say, hey, we're going to be down for quite a while. You might want to do X, Y, Z, right? Because we're not going to be available.
Stock exchanges will do that. A stock exchange might go down and officially announce to the market, sorry, we're fucked. Please send orders elsewhere for the rest of today. We cannot deal with you. We're done. We're down. Sorry.
Yep.
We'll be back up tomorrow.
If you have, like I just said, the worst case, if you lost the data, you just got to fess up and say you lost the data and give them all your money. Give them money to replace the data. You fucked up.
Yep. And this is where you run into like big company stuff of SLAs, service level agreements. You might have customers where you sign contracts guaranteeing certain amounts of uptime, clawbacks where a client can literally get refunds from you or cash payments for outages. Like it gets really messy in a hurry. This is why business people get involved. There's always like that VP who keeps calling into the line when there's an outage, and they're always like, "Can I get a status? What's going on? Have you fixed it yet?"
Yep, they're nervous about the wallet. Right?
Yep.
If you're out too long, they lose money.
So back to the Slack outage. Their website said that it was a localized partial outage for a long time.
It sure did.
While Twitter said it was completely down.
It's 100% down. The universe.
But at the same time, it did come back up pretty quickly.
After hours. Hours is not good.
Yeah.
Minutes is right? Many minutes is bad. Hours is real bad.
Yep.
Frontrecruiter.com doesn't go down for hours.
Yep.
It's when I'm sleeping. And then as soon as I wake up, it just takes a few minutes. And
Yep. I mean, our process is basically, I'll just message Scott and be like, hey, I think the database is broken.
We have better uptime than Slack. 100%.
We have really good, actually, for the 15 plus years we've been doing GeekNights, we got pretty good uptime.
And I've never lost data, ever. Not once. So, and that's just a one-person operation. So what excuse do you have, right?
Yeah. But that's it. It comes down to honesty, openness, problem-solving skills, and a holistic understanding of your technology and technology overall.
And promptness, right? Don't be delaying and,
Yep.
Right?
But I
And
think
when you do fix it, right? Tell everyone, right, what the fuck happened, like the technological details. Because even though most people
the post-mortem, we don't even have time to talk about that.
Yeah, you gotta write one and make it available to everyone who knew about the outage.
And if you're a big company like Netflix or Slack, like I'd love for there to be a little more openness because
they usually are pretty open with.
They usually are, but not always.
The only thing that they're kind of open and good with is the postmortems on the outages because those are great for not only customers to see that you're not bullshitting,
Yep.
to see exactly what went wrong. They can have their tech people look at it and go, okay, well that, and then everyone else can learn and not fuck up the
That's
same
it. You're adding to the body of human knowledge so someone can Google for a weird outage, find your postmortem because they pasted a log line that happens to be in yours.
You go online, there are places that like collect all these. You can go read them and learn how people have fucked up so you don't do it the same way.
I have written so many postmortems over the years. That's been one of my jobs.
Yeah, it's we don't usually write them because we don't have that many outages really of any significance, and also the only users are internal, so
Yeah.
like they don't care. There's no technological audience for.
Also, our systems are so federated to where there's like 5 different ways to download GeekNights if any one of them is down at any given time.
Oh, for GeekNights, yeah, we don't need. I mean, I basically tell people, I just like will tweet or something and be like, yeah, we're down because of this or whatever.
Yep. And capital markets, there are industries where some of this stuff does not apply because there are laws, regulations, rules, and governments involved that make things weird.
Mm-hmm.
That's the asterisk for, but I work for a military contract. Like, yeah, dude, I know what that's like. I've been there.
I'm hungry.
Yeah, me too. That was a good show.
I have a stomach outage.
And